Okay, well, I want to talk a little bit about it. I don't know how well versed you are on this, Mike. Something happened in the 1980s. Actually, many things happened in the 1980s, but I recently had a conversation with a lady named Simone Mendez, who in the early 1980s was a very young airman in the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, and was had a top secret clearance and was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, which, if you know your Western geography, you know that's in North Las Vegas, which is one of the busiest fighter bases in the world. A whole lot of military development and training operations take place there. The Air Force, and it's not very far from the legendary Groom Lake area, which has even more development and testing type of operations going on. All kinds of lights zooming around the sky in that area. People in Las Vegas are quite used to looking north and seeing lights zipping around. They know that's fighter jets flying off to the training area, which is just a little bit north of Las Vegas, and they do bombing runs, they do mock air combat drills, and some of these operations are very large. They involve a lot of planes. But Simone Mendez was there in 1981 as a communication specialist, and her job, she's enlisted. Her rank was airman, and her job was to manage inside this. Well, she had tasks to perform inside this communication center, which involved classified communications coming in, going out, getting encrypted, decrypted, and then transferred to the proper person on the base. Back then in the early 80s, a lot of this went on paper. It went from the electronics to paper, and the paper was transferred to the appropriate person with the classification stamps on it, top secret, secret, whatever. And there was a lot of it, a high volume of communication. So they had multiple people in this facility, and of course, we don't know everything that went through there. We never will. But Simone Mendez was a young lady from the upper Midwest. Even though her surname is Hispanic, she's actually, if you talk to her, her accent is very Wisconsin or Minnesota sort of accent. She was very interested in UFOs as a young lady. She had seen a few things in the sky. She didn't know what they were. She was quite interested in the topic. And at that time, late 70s, early 80s, there was a tremendous amount of public interest in that topic. She got to talking with another Air Force enlisted person in the communication center where she worked. And they talked about it quite a bit. And then in around August or September of 1981, one of the airmen that she worked with came to her and at her not at the base, but off base at her apartment, and showed her a document that seemed to confirm that the Air Force was tracking UFOs and knew that they existed and were extraterrestrial in origin. She was, of course, fascinated with this document. This guy was about the same rank as her, I think, and about the same age. And so they had this conversation about it. He showed her this document that he had that was stamped top secret and was and had all this really fascinating information in it. Now, that document is lost. We don't have any idea where it is. Nobody knows if it even exists anymore. But we're pretty sure it did exist at some point. Anyway, she asked him, now she will now tell you this was a mistake. She asked him, can I keep it? Just for a little while. I want to read it and make sure I understand it. And she kept it for months in her apartment in North Las Vegas. This is while she was working at the communications facility at Nellis. And apparently, and we don't know all the details here, but the guy's girlfriend the guy who shared the document with her, his girlfriend, at least Simone Mendez thought this was his girlfriend, went to the base and told somebody at the base that Simone had the document that was stamped top secret in her apartment, which, as you probably know, would be a huge security violation. Now, we don't know who this girlfriend is exactly, because she wasn't an employee at the base. We don't know what her job was or much about her at all. But she then went to Simone and said, come with me, we're going to take this document back to the base. This was in early 1982, after she'd held on to it for several months. And we don't know if apparently, according to Simone, she and the boyfriend had an ugly breakup. But that's not clear if that really happened or if that's just the story that was the narrative that was put forth. So she went back to the base with the document, Simone did, with the girlfriend, and returned the document to a supervisor. And she thought she was done with it. And this began several months of interrogation, which they brought in the FBI. And for several months, she was interrogated. She was questioned. And the FBI, and this is based on documents obtained through FOIA years later, the FBI concluded the document was bogus. There was no Air Force document saying that the Air Force was tracking UFOs or whatever. And she was not criminally charged, but she did, there was no court-martial or anything like that. She did lose her security clearance. And she had, as a result of this extremely stressful, this was like a very young lady, right? She's suddenly encountering these tough guys from the FBI and the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. She collapsed basically mentally and had a emotional mental breakdown, spent some time in the hospital. And when it was all over, and a few months later, they didn't really say anything to her in particular. They just said, well, okay, your security clearance is revoked. Goodbye. And she heard nothing more. And now, that in itself is not a big story, but we know what was going on in the 80s were frequent attempts at disinformation to UFO enthusiasts. And Simone was not the only one. She may have been one of the earliest ones, but there are other documented cases of people being disinformed, just be giving bogus documents about that fed into their expectations. And Simone Mendez was one of these. Now Simone is now after she left the Air Force several years later, she went home to the Midwest, where she still lives, and she has sort of stayed on the internet and watched people getting her story wrong and so forth. But there were other people like Paul Benowitz. I don't know if you heard of Paul Benowitz. He was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, near Kirtland Air Force Base. In fact, he lived from his house. He could see Kirtland Air Force Base, and the whole Manzano area, which used to be, I'm not sure it still is, but it used to be a major nuclear weapons storage facility. So there was all kinds of highly classified stuff going on there. If you fly into Albuquerque, to the Albuquerque Sunport, you fly over major government research facilities, and you also see roads that seem to end in mountains or hills. You'll see all kinds of interesting things go. A lot of it's just training facility. It shouldn't be get anyone's conspiracy theory going. I have a nephew who trained out there as a pararescue, Air Force pararescue, which is a very demanding job where you are basically a special forces soldier and a paramedic, and you go in and rescue pilots and try to save their lives and bring them back alive. They have a very rigorous training program, and a lot of the stuff they have out there in Kirtland is to train those guys. But they have Paul Benowitz was an accomplished engineer, scientist, and businessman who had a successful business in Albuquerque, and he thought he was seeing some weird stuff on Kirtland, and he went to Kirtland Air Force Base and told them what he had, and they disinformed him horribly over the next several years. This happened around the same time frame as Simone Mendez. They told him that it was aliens, and they gave him bogus government documents, just like Simone Mendez received a bogus government document. And during the 80s, there were a number of instances of false documents being passed on to innocent people who didn't know they were false. And in fact, Benowitz received his documents directly from the Air Force, so he knew that they were. He had every reason to believe they were legitimate. Other documents came in the mail to people or whatever, and there was no chain of custody, so they probably should have been more skeptical. But Benowitz actually had a mental breakdown as well, and his family then circled the wagons and wouldn't let anyone talk to him. But this is my favorite conspiracy theory right now. That in the 1980s, people at the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, particularly in Albuquerque, at Kirtland Air Force Base, but possibly other places, were heavily involved in disinforming people about UFOs.
I can believe that. Yeah. Well, Majestic 12. The Majestic 12.
Yeah, I think Majestic 12 probably was part of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if Bob Lazar supposedly saw a spaceship.
We don't know about Bob Lazar, but I have a hunch that he was part of that whole campaign. Yeah.
Yeah.
A useful patsy.
Yeah. Because his story, as I understand it, he's supposed to be some high-level physicist from MIT.
Well, he claimed to have an MIT degree, but
but there's no record of it.
There's no record of it. In fact, MIT doesn't have any idea who he is.
Yeah. So,
which obviously is the aliens removing the records from MIT.
Right.
Anyone could see that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't, that sounds like a very, I mean, maybe not it, because it's one, to send people off on the wrong track. Are they going to be chasing the aliens, or are they going to be spending more time watching the latest stealth technology, or SR-71, U-2, whatever?
Well, the SR-71 was already history at that point, but
yeah, and well, there's probably something replaced it by now that we don't know about, and try to keep people from not knowing what that is.
Well, I think it was mainly to poison the well.
Well, yeah. I mean,
if people hear, okay, that's all about aliens and UFOs, they're going to say, yeah, right. There's nothing going on out there, and what may have been going on was actually pretty exotic, but had nothing to do with aliens.
Or it may have been to get the Russians to spend more money on. If we're finding all this UFO stuff, maybe they should get on the ball and start finding more UFO stuff
could be
to compete with the U.S. I mean,
yeah. If you believe that the U.S. has extraterrestrial technology, you better get on the ball and track that down. Which of course is a blind alley. There's nothing there.
Yeah. Well, the Star Wars program probably, since it didn't work, but the Russians started putting so much effort into their own Star Wars program, spend money that they may never, that the technology could never meet, type of thing.
Well, yeah, right. Star Wars didn't have to work. It just had to scare the Russians. That was its only purpose. Yeah. And it seemed to work in that respect. Yeah. They did spend a lot of money developing technology on that program, but and some of it actually was pretty good technology, but they never had a missile defense system. But as long as the Russians believed that a missile defense system was on its way, they were motivated to come to the table and negotiate, right? Rather than they thought, this is an arms race we can't win. So,
kind of like from Dr. Strangelove, our mine technology, we cannot fall behind the Russians and our mine technology. When the doomsday bomb was going off, and
I got to get me a doomsday bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that they were.
There's always to deter.
Well, to a certain extent, it was kind of brilliant. I mean, they recognized the Russians cannot possibly outspend us. If we get into a race where it's just purely a question of how much money you can spend, we're going to win that race, and it doesn't even matter what the objective of the race is. It's just
right.
As long as they get in the race, they think they need to be in the race, we win. So in that sense, it was it had a lot of strategic smarts behind it. Yeah. And that was the time when all this was going on with the with the UFO disinformation. And I wonder if they're related. I have no idea.
Well, it's by killing two. I mean, maybe they discovered, hey, we're killing two birds with one stone. We got the UFO people who are now thinking those lights that are actually our latest aircraft technology, they're UFOs, so now they're chasing that. Where on the other hand, then you got the Russians who are like, oh, wait a minute, okay, so these guys over here are thinking, well, that's UFOs. Let's make sure that we're not missing out on something. I mean, they have been able to do 2 or 3 things, or make 3 objectives out of just one little rumor.
Yeah, we'll probably never know the truth behind that because a lot of the people involved in that are now dead. But And some of the people who were involved, who're still alive, really don't know what was about. There was a famous fellow named Richard Doty, who's kind of the stooge for all this, but I don't think Richard Doty really knew why he was disinforming people. He just knew that was his job. And he may or may not have had something to do with the MJ12 documents as well, but I think whoever did that obviously was a pretty decent document faker, but not great, but good, and that takes some skill that would require some training and concentration. So, 'cause a lot of people I respect really think the MJ12 documents were fake, or at least a large number of them were. So that is but it's not easy to make documents that at least look superficially like they came from the 1950s. So somebody must have been pretty highly skilled who did that. So that's my favorite conspiracy. I don't know why it was done or who did it exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it probably went on until early 90s, where it kind of petered out. And which I think is how conspiracies really end, is they don't really have a big dramatic Hollywood moment. They just kind of peter out.
Well, I think they reinvent themselves. I mean, there's still a lot of that, there's the alien technology. I mean, every so often some will come along, like the transistor was in alien technology.
Oh, yeah. Corso.
Yeah. So, as long as it, because when we're talking about when Nick was talking about the community, now I've been trying to understand why people believe, or why, what's the psychology? What is, of course, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, and I'm going through these papers, and I've just actually today hit on this that a conspiracy will stay alive, because it is recognized by a community, and I'm kind of confused between rational and irrational thought, because when I read it, a rational person. Some of the definitions are like, it makes a person, that a rational thinker is going to be more positive, or has a positive view on themselves, versus an irrational who has a negative view on themselves. I'm not sure how that relates, but there's also that the rational is going to use the evidence, real evidence, scientifically derived, through the scientific method, trying to be, all the various steps from, generating the hypothesis, determining the, that whole thing, versus the irrational who's going to say, ghosts exist, so here's the proof that, and this is how we prove it, that they exist, because of, without falsifying, with nothing scientific behind it. Then, but again, and I've come across this, I've heard this on other podcasts and so on, and it kind of makes sense. See, like a person that believes in UFOs, that they're alien crafts from the Pleiades. You can get a whole bunch of those people into a room, and if you have a conference, bring these people in, everyone that believes that aliens are, they're the gray aliens from the Pleiades. And they'll sit down, and you can take a vote of everybody, and that whole thing will be in agreement that UFOs are gray aliens from the Pleiades. And they'll treat that as rational, because they, you got all these researchers who've done their research. I'm air quoting for the those who'll be hearing the audio version of this. They claim to be scientists. Some of them are, or at least really close to being scientists. But they'll say, we did all this research. This is all this, and they'll consider themselves thinking rationally, as opposed to what a rational person should be doing. Looking at the evidence. Okay, how does where's the I've never where's these gray aliens? We don't have the bodies. We don't have the evidence that they have ever existed. We've pointed our telescopes at the Pleiades. We've not seen anything out of the ordinary, anything that might resemble technology, like what we've talked about on the show. How a civilization is going to, the telltale signs of a civilization, how they communicate, what chemicals that might be in there, things that we, many of the topics, go back to the earlier, any of the other unseen podcasts, you'll hear the discussions about this, but, this, the evidence, you don't have, there's not this evidence. So rational would be, that there are no aliens, but again, what we would consider irrational, they consider themselves rational. And that's how they justify it within their group. Cause there is that, there's always that group. There's the 9/11 truthers, the Obama birth certificate truthers, the false flag shootings. They all believe this. They all within the community. I mean, that's I want to avoid the politics, but I talked about I think Trump has played into that, finding those groups and trying to be their guy type of thing. Yeah, we believe you. I believe that this. I'll try to do this without any more politics. But
well, yeah,
so certainly they're within that that community, and I had kind of alluded to that earlier. Are you glitching?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Because you kind of just went, stopped.
I was looking at something off screen. Still trying to find James. No joy. Well, we've been talking for about 80 minutes now. I think we're going to wrap it up soon.
Hey, this is about the most I've talked on this show, in all of them, I think.
Well, it was just you and me, so you had no choice.
Yeah. And I got a chance to get a word in edgewise.
Now, we should point out that people can go to The Skeptic's Guide to Conspiracy, which can be found wherever fine podcasts are aggregated, and hear you every week, basically.
For the time being.
Explain why Alex Jones is a lying sack of shit. When Alex Jones goes away, you're going to have to find something else, but...
Yeah, that's been
said, he's circling the drain right now. Did you see that video of him talking to a pile of horse shit in the street?
Was he looking in a mirror?
Well, he's looking down at the street, and there's this, it looks like poop in the street. I don't know, or something, and he's talking to it, or he's shouting at it. There's no audio, so you can't tell what he's saying. And this is, I think, somewhere in Texas. And I'll see if I can find a link for you.
Yeah.
It looks like he just completely lost his tiny little mind.
I would hope so. I mean,
But he'll get paid well for it, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
draw more advertisers.
Yeah, because he's like, I mean, he's suing I think he's suing PayPal because they cut him off financially. I mean, he's still getting out through other side channels and so on. I've been trying to seek out some of the other, there's, guys. Well, I haven't looked at George Norrie, but that bunch. I know there's a couple other Alex Jones types, but they're not it's like, it's either it's just Alex Jones. I mean, then these other guys that kind of come and go. I don't think there's anybody stepping up into his shoes other than maybe Glenn Beck or, maybe, no.
Glenn Beck's a different type of crazy. He's wrong about almost everything, but it's like he's wrong for different reasons.
Yeah. Well, a lot of his advertisers are the same as Alex Jones, so I kind of.
Oh, really?
He's appealing to that. Well, Alex Jones used to be really big on gold and silver.
Gold, silver, and fake remedies for all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Snake oil, and survivalist sort of things like seeds and that sort of thing.
Heirloom seeds.
What they call preppers. Yeah, preppers.
Preppers. Yeah.
Preppers have to have non-GMO seeds to plant for when the shit hits the fan, right?
Yeah. No hybrids, no.
Because the GMO seeds are a government conspiracy to destroy our health.
To zap and purify all our precious bodily fluids.
I can't imagine any of Alex Jones's bodily fluids being precious, but.
But yeah. Because when I probably don't have those notes here, but I actually, on a couple occasions, I would actually note what the commercials were on his podcast, where he'd run the commercials, and I tried to list everything. And early, I want to say probably in maybe 2002, 2003 era, about 35% of the commercials are for an Alex Jones product. There's videos, his gold and silver sales, things like that. The rest of it was water filters that filters out the fluoride and all the toxins. Colloidal silver was a big one.
Colloidal silver. That strikes me as one of the really big snake oil things.
Well, technically, silver's an antibiotic when you use topically, like a catheter. They'll be coated with silver, silver nitrate. When a baby's born, they'll put silver nitrate in the eyes. Supposedly, it's supposed to kill any type of STD that the mother may have had at the time.
Ah, yes, I do remember. I remember an antibiotic we put in my kid's eyes, but I don't think it was silver nitrate. I think they moved on from that.
Yeah. My day, I guess when I was a kid, that was the thing from the 60s, 70s. So I think nowadays they probably got better stuff. But anyhow, but topically, silver is a really good antibiotic. So someone got the bright idea to blend it into water, kind of like there's a lot more in it than homeopathic remedy. There's actual suspended silver in it, and you drink it, and it's supposed to kill the bacteria. And people have been doing it, and they keep doing it. And when you overdose or you take too much of this, you turn blue. Your skin actually turns blue. like literally Smurf blue, not just blood vein blue.
Right.
That's the silver collecting in under the skin.
Right. Yeah. So yeah. It's I used to many years ago. It's been quite a long time. I used to listen to a podcast that was on Alex Jones' network. It wasn't Alex Jones, but it was on his network, and I remember all that stuff. I got really sick of that and stopped listening to that podcast. But if anybody wants to know what that podcast was, just drop me a line. I'll let you know. But anyway, I think we're going to have to wrap up now, Mike.
Okay.
Thanks for dropping by. It looks like Nick's not going to return. And unfortunately, James couldn't make it. James Garrison couldn't make it. I hope we'll have him and you and everybody else at sort of like our series finale in a couple weeks. We're going to do actually two of them. We're going to do one here for North American people, another one which may also include some people in Asia, in the Far East, or in Australia. And then we're going to do another one a few days later at a time that will be friendly to the Near East and Europe. And we will put that out. And that will be the last of the Unseen podcast. We will be done with that. Now, a lot of the people and ideas and approaches of the Unseen podcast will not go away. They will be absorbed into something that we have the working title of as Wow Signal Live, spun back into the Wow Signal. I already have a lot of information about that out on the RSS feed and on the blog at unseenpodcast.com. So if you have a chance to review that, please do. And we will be back. This has been the Unseen Podcast, the unscripted, uncut, and open participation podcast from Dream of the Open channel. For more information, including show notes for this episode, please visit unseenpodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Podcast Unseen. The Unseen Podcast is produced by Paul Carr and is released under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. Music is by DJ Spooky.